I can't buy the air I breathe. I can't buy the trees. I can't buy the deepest seas. But it don't matter, 'cause they're there for free.
Hello and welcome to Around the World in 88 Tales. I'm David Heathfield and I'm at the Royal Albert Memorial Museum in Exeter. I've been meeting storytellers all around the world, telling stories, learning stories, all in response to artefacts from the Royal Albert Memorial Museum. And right now I'd like to introduce you to a dear friend and a wonderful storyteller, Mindy Neo in Singapore. Hi, Mindy.
Hi, it's so lovely to be here. Thank you, David. Thank you, everyone who are watching. Hello.
Wonderful. And if you are watching, of course, you must be watching if you're with us, then please tell us where you are, who you are, and you can respond to the stories and tell us about what you make of them. You can do that in the chat, whether you're live or in a recording on YouTube or on Facebook. So, Mindy, you're in Singapore, right?
Yes, I am. I'm in Singapore, hot Singapore.
Hot Singapore.
Well, it's raining at the moment, but it's still very hot. Yes,
We're kind of near
lovely.
the equator.
That's right. That's right. Very far away.
So, Mindy, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself as a storyteller and your interest in storytelling in this project?
My pleasure. I I've always loved stories, and I told stories when I was a child. It was only when I became older, I realized that storytelling, was something that I would like to continue to do, and I joined, the Storytelling Association, and I also started telling stories in libraries and things like and just to see the children's faces light up. So when I became a teacher, I also told stories, and when I started tell my when I started teaching, I told my students a story a day, and yeah, it was challenging, it was stressful, but I loved it. So yes, I continue to tell stories when I can.
Fantastic, fantastic. You're involved in the Storytelling Association in Singapore, aren't you, as well?
I am. Yes, I am. Yes.
It's
We
wonderful,
just
not just telling stories in your school, but actually promoting it as an art form and an education means as well.
truly, yeah. And you as well, you were my teacher, and I applied some of these techniques in class, which the kids absolutely enjoyed. So yeah, storytelling as an oral tradition is something that we're actively trying to promote in Singapore. It's not reading from a book, but it's telling the story, which is much more impactful, and yeah, it's just wonderful. And we just had a storytelling festival here, so
Yes,
um,
congratulations on that.
it was yeah, it was truly wonderful experience. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, so let's. Well, I just want to say hello to Maria Teresa Tere in Argentina. Lovely to see you too.
Hi.
I'm going to now reveal the artifact from today. It's a special item. It's a sword. It might be quite difficult to make out. You can see the base of the sword going all the way to the tip at the top, and it's ancient. It's a sword. Well, we could call it a stabbing sword or a rapier sword that was discovered here in Devon, and it was found in 1867 near Tallerton, which is a little village not far from Exeter, and it's Bronze Age. So it's made of a copper alloy, and it's about 32 centimeters. So it's not very long, about that long. Yeah, not very long, and it would have had a handle, of course, to hold it, because what you're seeing here at the deeper end would be, that would be covered maybe in some kind of handle of whether it's wood or leather, I don't know, and then reaching to the tip. It would be quite fragile because copper is not a very strong metal, so it might have been more for show of power rather than actually being used as a weapon. But very exciting. So Bronze Age, it could be anywhere between 700 BC back to 2600 BC. I'm not sure exactly the age of this sword. So, Mindy, let me tell you a story, and afterwards let's hear your story. There was once a king. Not a happy king. The king was always worried about what would happen in the future. Perhaps my people will rise up against me. There may be famine. There may be a plague. He was so anxious about what the people in the city were thinking that he decided to disguise himself as a beggar. He put on old rags and went into the street. He listened to conversations. At the end of the day, he saw an old man at the edge of the road, and he was mending shoes. But as he mended shoes, he smiled and he sang, "I have faith, all will be well." How can this poor man be so happy? The king, dressed as a beggar, followed the poor man home through the streets. He bought a little loaf of bread with the little money he had earned and went into a small hovel of a house. Once he was inside, the seeming beggar knocked on the door. The cobbler opened it. "Oh, come in, my friend. A guest is a gift. Come in and eat." He brought the king, dressed as a beggar, inside, broke his bread in half and gave the king the better half. The seeming beggar ate and asked, "Why are you so happy?" "Oh, I am lucky. I am a cobbler. I have enough to eat. I have faith. All will be well." The king couldn't understand. He left that small house, went back to the palace, and there he made a decree. "I will test this cobbler. I ban all cobblers from working in the city. Tomorrow he will not be so positive." The next day the king returned, dressed as a beggar, to the cobbler's home. He knocked on the door opened. "Welcome, welcome, my friend, come in and eat. Oh, glad that you have returned. Sit." And there was a spread of food, some vegetables that had been cooked with spices. Well, the king, dressed as a beggar, began to eat, but asked again, "How could you be so happy? I heard that cobblers had been banned from the city." "Oh, it's true, it's true. I was worried, but then I met a wood carrier. He was carrying firewood into the city. I asked if he could help. He gave me some work. I carried wood all day. It was hard, but at the end of the day, the wood carrier gave me some money. That I bought this food, and now I'm sharing it with you, my friend." "I see." The king left. I must test this man's faith further. The next night, he had declared the next day that no one in the city was allowed to carry firewood. And at the end of the next day, he returned to that cobbler's house and knocked on the door. And the cobbler, who the day before had been carrying wood all day, greeted him again. Come in, welcome, welcome. I have the most delicious food for you. I hoped you would come. Sit down, sit down." And he fed the king now with not just spiced vegetables and bread, but also fruits of many kinds. Well, the king couldn't eat any more. He was so full, and said again, "How did you manage this?" "I heard that firewood carriers had been banned." "It's true. But there was a recruitment drive for guards at the palace, and now I'm a guard, and I was paid, so I bought this food for you. I have faith, all will be well." "I see." Well, the king the next day declared that all his guards would not be paid until the end of a month, and he knew that this poor man would have nothing to buy any more food with. He will be miserable now. But when the king returned the next night and knocked at the door of the humble hovel, when the door swung open, he was greeted even more warmly than ever before. "I knew you were coming, friend. I knew you will eat better than ever before." There was even meat on the table, and the king feasted. "How did you do this? I heard the declaration that no guards would be paid till the end of the month." "Well, that's true." "I have a secret to share with you. As a guard, I was given a sword, a bright and shining sharp sword. But I took the sword to the pawnbroker. He lent me some money. I gave him the sword to look after until the end of the month. I said, at the end of the month I will buy the sword back, but now give me some money. I have a friend coming to eat tonight. And look at the feast that I've prepared." Well, the king couldn't believe the delicious food there on the table. He ate and ate and ate and thought, this is impossible. How can I test this man further? The next day, the king, dressed in his royal regalia, came with armoured guards, dragging a poor man through the streets. He approached the guard outside the palace, the guard who was truly the cobbler. "You," said the king, "you see this thief here. Your task is to cut off his head." "Cut off his head? Why must I do this?" "It is an order from me. You, guard, cut off his head." Well, the cobbler didn't recognise the king as the beggar that had come the day before. He looked at the poor man on the ground. And then he recognised him. This was the wood carrier who had given him employment, the man who had given him money. "Why did you steal?" "I am not a thief," said the poor man, "but my work was taken away. I could not feed my family. I just took a little food from the market." "Kill him now," said the king. By now a crowd had gathered outside the palace. Many were watching. The beggar thought. The cobbler thought, what should I do? What should I do? And then he had an idea. He looked at the king, he looked at the people gathered around, and he said, "This poor man, does he truly deserve to die? Surely the decision should not rest with us humans, but in the gods' hands. Listen, I will draw my sword, and if this man deserves to die, may my sword cut off his head with one blow. But if the gods decide that this man should live, then may my sword, when I draw it from its sheath, be turned to wood." Well, people gathered. People fell silent. People were amazed. The guard drew the sword from its sheath, and the sword was indeed made of wood. A simple wooden sword that he had replaced his metal sword with. The king was amazed. The people fell back and gasped. It was a miracle, a miracle. The poor man was released. The king stepped up to the guard, who was truly a cobbler. Do you know who I am? I am that same visitor, that beggar, who has been to your house every night, who you have shared your food with. It is you, the king. Oh!" And the guard, the cobbler, was, in truth, a little fearful. But the king said, "You have taught me the power of faith. You keep a happy heart, full of joy, and I have learned from you. If you agree to be my advisor, I believe that things will go better in this land. With you at my side, I have faith all will be well." The cobbler became a chief advisor, and I can tell you that in that land all was well. So this story comes to you. I learned it from a storyteller in India called Banu Mathy. I think it's being told a lot over recent months with the pandemic and all of the troubles that we've faced. I think it's a story from Afghanistan, from the Jewish tradition originally, and it's a story that I gladly give to all of you. So, yeah, thank you very much. And feel free to write your comments. And now I go to Mindy Neo in Singapore.
Oh, what a beautiful story. Thank you, David. Yeah. And well, I don't have an actual sword in my story, but I do have a swordfish. Not sure if
Ah,
here we go. Well, and so my story has this swordfish in it. A long, long time ago, Singapore was not known as Singapore. It was known as Singapura or Temasek. And it was an island filled with trees and wild animals. It was just lush forests. Now, along the coast was a village, and the people in this village, they grew their food and they even fished. But they say that the fishermen there they were always afraid of the waters. For you see, they said the waters were infested with ferocious swordfish. I mean, these fish had long, sharp bills. And when the fishermen went out to sea, these fish would jump out of the water and they could pierce their bodies with their bills. They pierced them, they could pierce, and all the wounds on their bodies would be bloody, and some of them died in the water even before they could get any fish. And when the tide was high enough, these fish would even attack the people on the shore. They would jump out and they would pierce men, women, children. It was frightening. People would run and hide in their village. And so it happened so often that they decided to tell the Raja, the ruler, about this. And the ruler couldn't believe the stories. He said, "Oh, the people must be making it up. How is it that fish could jump out of the water?" And so he went down to that village, to the sea. And the people all came up to him, "Raja, you must do something, you must do something." And he put up his hand and told his soldiers to form a line along the coast facing the sea. And if indeed there were these swordfish, they were to kill them. So the soldiers did just that. His guards lined up along the coast, their legs close together. And when the tide went up, the waters started to stir. It became darker, and these fish suddenly sprang out of the water, and their sharp bills started to pierce the legs, the chest, the neck of these soldiers. They were shouting in pain. They were using their swords to cut them. But there were just so many of these swordfish, so many, that they laid down and they cried out in pain, and most of them died. And when the Raja saw this, he was shocked. How is this possible? And these magnificent swordfish started to jumped out of the water towards them, and so he was pulled back. Now the villagers came out to see what had happened. And a little boy shouted out, did you get your soldiers to stand in front of the sea?" And they all turned to him. And then this little boy said, why don't you cut the banana stems? Use the banana stems instead." And all of them looked at him and thought, yeah, that's a good idea. Even the Raja thought, why didn't I think of that? And so he called the rest of his men and the villagers, and they all went to the plantation nearby, and they started cutting down the banana plants. And when the tide was low, they started to push these stems into the sand, push them down, and they formed a barricade in front of the sea. And then they waited. And when the tide came up again, the swordfish came, and they leapt out of the sea, and their bills got stuck in the banana stems. Every one of those swordfish had their bills stuck, and they were stuck tight onto the banana stems, so much so that it became like a wall of swordfish. And so when the tide went down, the people took these, they chopped, or rather they killed all these swordfish and took them back and cooked them for a feast to celebrate this boy who thought of such a brilliant idea. Well, the Raja went back to his palace, and after a while, the Prime Minister came and whispered into his ear, the boy, he is growing in popularity, and the people say he might be the next Raja. He might take over your place." Now the Raja was filled with jealousy, and he told his Prime Minister to get rid of the boy. And so the Prime Minister called the guards, and in the dark of night, they went out. They went back to that village. They went back to the house where the boy lived. It was on top of a hill. And so they went in, and as the boy slept, these guards took out the kris, the daggers, and stabbed the boy, and stabbed him, and stabbed him. The blood spewed out of his wounds, and they say that there was so much blood that it covered the hill where his house was. And that hill became blood red. The people there called that hill Red Hill, or Bukit Merah in Malay. And to this day, in modern Singapore, we still have a place called Red Hill. We call it Bukit Merah, in memory of that little boy who had saved the lives of the villagers a long time ago. Thank you.
That's amazing, Mindy. Wow, there's some very strong images in that story. It's really powerful. And
Thank
the
you.
blood red hill. Wow, and it takes us right into where you are in Singapore and your heritage there. Is that
Yes.
why you chose this story?
Yes, I really, I'm trying to find out the stories that, or tell the stories that we have here, and to celebrate our local heritage. In fact, I haven't told this story before, so this is really my first time telling it to you, but I'm so happy I could. And it has led me on a journey to find out more about this place, to find out, more about this legend. This story comes from ancient texts called the Sejarah Melayu, the Malay Annals, and it's got beautiful, just really wonderful stories in there that should be known and should be shared by many here in our country. You should be proud of it, really. So I'm looking forward to sharing more of these stories with my students and with
I
anyone
wish
who
you great success with that. Delving into our heritage and bringing it to the new generation is really important. And now you've also shared this story around the world. Thank you so much. Around the world in 88 tales. And comments coming in from Tere in Argentina. Wow. Tammy, such wisdom from one so young and his fate so unjust. Your storytelling's really engaging with a real sense of place. Yeah, fantastic. Wonderful. Well, Mindy, thank you very, very much. And
Thank you all. Thank you.
You could be part of this project. I wish you very well and goodbye.
I can't buy the trees. I can't buy the deepest seas, but it don't matter, 'cause they're there for free.